Welcome to the Wonder Whimsy podcast. I'm Kim, and today we're exploring one of the great paradoxes of being human, how to live with a sense of wonder without losing our grip on reality. Philosopher Sam Keen writes, how can we be astonished at the world and yet at home in it? And this question runs through his book, Apology for Wonder, especially the chapter that we're going to be reading and discussing today, called Wonder and Authentic Life. So Keene says that an authentic life isn't just lived entirely in control or entirely in chaos. It's a dance between two ancient gods, Apollo, the god of order and clarity, and Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and freedom. So if we have too much Apollo, we become rigid and imprisoned by our schedules and our rules. If we have too much Dionysus, we dissolve and we lose impulse, overstimulation, or it's an endless escape, right? So Keene calls these two extremes pathologies, not diseases of the body, but illnesses of the soul that happen when we forget balance. His cure isn't another system or rule book, it's what he names Homo tempestivus, the timely person, the one who knows when to plan and when to surrender, when to build and when to dance. So, in this episode, we're going to ask questions like how do we live that rhythm in our own time? And what does wonder look like in a world of deadlines and notifications? And how can we be astonished yet still at home in the world that we've made? So, joining me today is Andy Rhodes, a friend of mine who's a history teacher, artist, and philosophy lover. So, thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to finally do this. I know we've been talking about it for a while, so I'm excited we're finally diving into this chapter. And I know you've read the entire book. And so I only read this one chapter, but as I was reading the chapter, it was really speaking to me. But this quote really stood out to me by G.K. Chesterton. How can we contrive to be at once astonished at the world and yet at home in it? We need to combine an idea of wonder and an idea of welcome. We need to be happy in this wonderland without once being merely comfortable. So, what do you think of this quote?
I think that it's referring to not being blissfully ignorant in a sense. So if we focus only on optimism or good feelings, uh, we're likely not to notice a lot of really important things in the daily life
Hmm.
because we have limits. We have to sleep, we have to eat, we have limited finances. There's also danger in the world, you know. So if you're only focusing on happiness, uh, I mean, I don't think it'd be really hard for anyone to solely focus on that. So if they're only focused on happiness, it probably is, maybe something of a mental disorder, or is someone living in denial, you know? So I think that's what you're talking about, not feeling comfortable in the world. Like if you're at wonder, wonder also is connected with the concept of awe and terror. So, and Sam Key talks about that earlier in the book that um, there he talks about things that are he used the word like tremendum, I think, like in a Latin sense, like things that are basically tremendously daunting or intimidating,
Hmm.
like the universe or a god or multiple gods, like terrifying. But also, if any of us encountered an angel or a god, we would probably be terrified, but also we would be mesmerized.
Hmm.
We would think, wow, this is amazing, but we also might be scared, so it's like a combination, so it's not just a peaceful delight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, to invite a sense of wonder can be uncomfortable and, dare I say, scary because you're
Mm,
inviting a sense of wonder because wonder
mm,
is related to uncertainty. And
mm,
so if we think we figured out the world and everything's
mm,
fitting into these neat categories and we think we understand the world, that can feel really comfortable. But
mm,
if we open up to the possibility of mystery, that maybe
mm,
we don't understand things,
mm,
there's a certain thrill in mystery, but also kind of a terror and mystery too.
mm,
So I think he points out it's kind of the heart of the human condition, the thrill of
mm,
mystery and the warmth of comfort, the warmth of belonging,
yeah,
feeling at home, right? How can we
mm,
feel at home if we're feeling mystified?
yeah, mm,
So, and I think it's interesting how he ties in authenticity and how he equates authenticity to meaning holding wonder and stability together,
okay,
right? So this
yeah,
balance of holding wonder and stability, but without becoming numb or detached.
yeah. So what tends to make us feel comfortable, at least in a general sense, is something strong that protects us or holds us. Like we started as children, and that general sense, I think, continues.
Hmm.
Like like a lot of people find comfort wrapping themselves in a blanket,
Hmm.
you know, or getting a hug from someone they trust and care about.
Yeah.
Make it recenters them,
Hmm.
or just the idea of being in a home. If you're in your own home, you can at least close the doors, if not lock the doors, and you feel a rest from the rest of the world. Because
Yeah.
out there, it's not only yours, it's theirs, and it's also not any the aspects of it that they don't belong to any person. So
Yeah.
at least in your own home, there's a sense of this is my domain, it's my space, and so it's focused on me, and it can be my enjoyment, my replenishment, my privacy. I
Hmm.
think the same thing is true with just our inner selves. Like we have an internal world, and so that's where the boundaries comes in. Like
Hmm.
the the thing we'll talk about, the Apollo and Dionysus. Dionysus is about openness and pushing to the limits and even crossing boundaries,
Hmm.
whereas Apollo is delineating strict um, categories and distinctions and
Yes.
walls. You know.
Right. And so I feel like this quote is sort of suggesting, or it's posing the question, really, how can we marry the two? How
Mm,
can we be both astonished and at home? How can we
mm,
be both comfortable and bewildered, right?
mm,
It's almost
mm,
like finding
mm,
comfort and
mm,
uncertainty. Um, so I can personally relate to this
mm,
feeling a lot.
yeah,
In moments in my life where I felt sort of a sense of just bewilderment or astonishment, and just kind of accepting that I'm okay with not knowing everything. I'm okay with uncertainty. I'm
mm,
okay with feeling a little unstable. And so I think that when we sit in when we constantly like put ourselves in situations that aren't necessarily comfortable, we
yeah,
start becoming more comfortable within that discomfort.
okay,
So I don't know. I feel like I've reached a point where I'm almost more comfortable when I'm uncertain.
okay,
Because
okay,
if I'm in a position where I feel like everything is predictable, I'm
uh-huh.
not comfortable. I'm actually really bored with predictability.
Yeah,
So you know me well enough to know that
mm,
like my
mm,
lifestyle is
mhm,
very
yeah,
very unpredictable. Every
yeah,
day is so different. As an
right,
actor,
mhm,
like I never
mhm,
know when I'm going to get an audition.
mm, right,
And that's totally unpredictable. I
mhm,
never know when I'm going to get a booking, and that's
right,
totally unpredictable. There's very little structure to my life.
mm,
Even the class, like I teach
mm,
health, I teach
mm,
yoga, I
mhm,
teach other fitness classes, and there
mhm,
is some stability within that
mm,
schedule,
right,
but that schedule fluctuates a lot too.
right,
So, in my personal life, I feel like I've gotten to a point where I've become very comfortable with uncertainty and in moments where I can't predict what's going to happen, just in my experience as an actor and just my
Yeah.
overall lifestyle. But I mean, he's basically saying that we need to be happy in this wonderland as
Mm,
opposed to being scared of uncertainty or
mm,
scared of wondering. You know,
mm,
it's possible that many of us are afraid of opening our minds to the possibility we might be wrong about something. Because
okay.
when we've developed sort of like a sense of comfort and this is how I want to operate in the world and this is how I see myself, when
Mm,
something challenges that, it can be frightening. But I think what he's saying here is that instead of being scared that
mm,
our worldview might change,
mm,
be happy that our worldview could change. Be
right.
happy that someone could
Mm,
change our mind or something could change our mind.
mm,
So anyway, that's kind of what I get
yeah.
from it. But I don't know. How can you, is there anything in your life, how you can personally relate to this idea of marrying the two?
Yeah, I mean, I originally found the book in 2005. I was in the Emory Theological Library in Atlanta,
Hmm.
and I was researching about religion because I'm not religious now, but I was very religious then.
Hmm.
And I was trying to understand the doctrine of creation from like Catholic and Protestant and Eastern Orthodox theology. Like, from a Christian standpoint, what was the point of the universe? And this book was sitting next to all those books.
Okay.
Um, and so I was like, the word apology, it has a distinct meaning in philosophy and law and theology, which
Yeah.
people might not know about. I know about it because in my mid 20s, I was pursuing a career as a Christian apologist.
Mm.
So that was going to be my career. My dad is a pastor, my sister's a pastor, my mom basically a pastor. So it's a big part of my life.
So
And but
let me
yeah,
ask you this.
yeah.
Did you ever encounter anybody that misinterpreted the term as like, are
Oh,
you
constantly. Yeah.
apologizing
Right,
for being
right.
a Christian? So like I'm
Mm,
familiar with like
mm,
the ancient origins of the
mm,
original meaning of the word
mm.
apology meant
Uh-huh.
to defend,
Right.
not to like ask for forgiveness. An apology is like a reason for believing this or
Yeah.
a reason. So, but nowadays,
Mm,
in the modern
mm.
world, we often
Right,
associate the word apology with
right.
like asking for forgiveness. So I feel like the
Yeah,
title of this book,
right.
Apology of Wonder, it really just
Mm,
means like the reason we should wonder. And
mm,
Sam Keen is writing why
right.
wonder is so important. So I'm sure that,
Mm,
you can
mm. Yeah,
a Christian apologist, I'm sure
right.
got, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, yeah. Anytime I ever brought that up, so yeah, so that's kind of where I was going with my explanation is just that it comes like you said, it comes from the Greek word apologia, which means defense, like you said, and the book Apology was by Plato, actually, but because Socrates, didn't write any books, but it's Plato's he says it's the transcript of Socrates' defense when he was put on trial. So, like, 'cause he's put on trial. He was accused of corrupting the youth and destroying traditional beliefs in gods,
Hmm.
things like that. So, his self, because he didn't have a lawyer, he like decided to defend himself on trial. So it's just this transcript,
Yeah.
but like in the intellectual realm for Jewish and Christian and Islamic. Um, they have apologists that say, okay, here's why you should believe in God, or here's the why we trust the scriptures, and here are the reasons. Like the Apostle Paul, he went to Athens and he defended Christianity. He went to like where the philosophers hang out, in Mars called Mars Hill, and so that's where the Christian apologetics comes from. It's like there's a verse in 1 Peter 3:15. It says, "Always be ready to give an answer for the um, hope that is within you." So it's basically saying like what's the intellectual reasons that ground generally like why you would trust something. So anyways, that's just the Christian version of it. But it could be a political apologist, like somebody you may say someone's an apologist for something just means they're arguing for it.
Yeah.
So like you said, um the book is yeah, he's making defense. He's saying this, and that's why I was attracted to it because it seemed to be a very comprehensive like philosophy of life or a way of looking at philosophy of life because he was addressing the situation in 1969, which was that Nietzsche had said God was dead in the late 1800s, and then in the 1960s there was actually an Emory theologian that um, I think it was on the cover of Time magazine, an article by him in the 60s. It said, "Is God dead?" And so there was a, a feeling among intellectuals and among, as far as Christian intellectuals and intellectuals in general, and definitely Christian theologians, that they couldn't make the kind of broad sweeping statements with assurance like they could. They felt like they could hundreds of years before. So Sam Keen was writing in that context, saying, "Okay, is there a path for integrating?" The kind of wonder that religious people have, or the kind of wonder that an atheist could have or an agnostic. Is there something that we can actually trust in that might actually get us somewhere, like gives us real knowledge or gives us a sense of a mystical experience or just encountering the world in a holistic way where we're not deluding ourselves, that we're not just tricking ourselves or, we're not just, like Marx is famous for saying that religion is the opium of the masses, or
Hmm.
it's not exactly how he said it, but something like that. But basically, the idea that that you go to your pet beliefs or your spirituality or your religion or whatever. I'm just saying some people say this that to make yourself feel better, you
Hmm.
know. And so Sam Keen was trying to say, well, that's all there, but what is really true? What's the root of this, and what's true about the root of it, and what part of this is real, and then beyond that, like how can you deal with all these things in a way that creates and sustains healthy living? Because that's the the chapter is called Wonder and Authentic Life. It's the second to last chapter of the book, and just real quick, the way he sets it up is the first part of the book talks about primitive human beings, or what we call primitive, like before organized societies. And he's talking about how they were in awe of the universe. So they thought, a lot of the religions before our organized ones, like because organized societies, like written history is like 5,000 years old. Um, and these most of our religions, like Hinduism, is like 5,000 years old, and all the other ones that are common today are much younger than that. So before the organized societies, it was people were mostly animistic or polytheistic. Like animism, meaning like they saw spirits. They thought there were spirits in the trees, the water, the sky, the rocks, and shamans would go into trances to talk with those spirits. And then polytheists, meaning they believe in many gods, and that those are the most common religions. I just speak of someone who's a history nerd. I teach history at high school level, so just some of the things that I've learned and fascinated by. And so he talks about that, and then he talks about so he calls that Homo admirans, I think, like humans um, being in admiration or awe of the world. And then when he gets to the modern world, he calls it Homo faber, like humans that like fabricate, humans that make something and try to control, and so like just the machine world. And then
Yeah.
so a lot of people in the last couple of years got concerned that humans were trying to become or being forced to become machines and losing their humanity. And like, Marx talked about that people were alienated from their work. It wasn't significant. So anyways, that's the kind of context in which he's trying to address like how, he talks about in actually in the chapter that a lot of the atheistic materialist kind of scientific method focus that was coming in the 1800s, it led for a lot of people to feel despair
Yeah.
and also to feel like their future wasn't open. It was fixed, like determinism had decided everything for them. And so Dionysus comes in and says, no, 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 there is openness, and existentialism comes in and says, no, 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 there's risk
Hmm.
and things like that. So it's Dionysus. Well, I'll wrap it up for now with this: the idea that historians talk about Dionysus coming back three different times. Like one in the Middle Ages, where there's like a adoration of Mary. It was like a and the feminine, like in a very high lofty thing in the Middle Ages, and then again at the late 1700s as a reaction to the Enlightenment, like Romanticism, like the French Revolution,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. And then the third time is the 1960s. And you think about all of the pushback against control and people wanting freedom, and the hippies going back to nature and all that stuff. And so that's a lot of what Sam Keen is addressing. Like for example, he says that he's concerned that a lot of the hippies that are starting, the ones that are starting communes, that they're going to fail because they've gone so far in Dionysus and thrown off Apollo. They don't have contracts with each other. They don't, a lot of them, they don't say, hey, this is what we're about. You could change it, but they don't have agreements. They just like, well, we'll just go with the feeling. It's going to be all right. So it's like overly romantic. It's like the
Hmm.
no idea of the noble savage. If we, just get back to nature, everything will be fine. So that's a lot of what drove me into this. Is like, okay, there's insights in these extremes, but like, how do we build society and build a life that incorporates the best of these things without us destroying ourselves? And also without killing spontaneity, because we don't want that either.
Right. Yeah, I really appreciate how Keen, writing this in the
Mm,
1960s,
mm,
he has an interesting reference point
mm,
because
mm,
there was a rebellion against order,
mm,
against law, against
mm.
these disciplines, against religion.
Yeah.
There was a rebellion against that, and he saw what can happen when you take this concept of
Mm,
Dionysus too
yeah.
far,
Yeah.
right? When you wonder too much. And
Yeah.
even though this book is advocating wonder, and this
Mm,
book is basically saying you shouldn't apologize for wonder
mm,
because, like you mentioned, the hippie
mm.
movement,
Right.
they were very criticized for going too
Mm,
far, losing their minds,
mm.
going
Right.
crazy,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
psychedelics and things like that.
Yeah.
But he's saying, actually, no, they were onto something. We shouldn't
Right.
apologize for wonder.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
but if we wonder too much,
Uh-huh.
then we risk losing our minds and
Right.
we risk losing accountability and
Mm,
responsibility in
mm,
our relationships, right? So he's
mm,
suggesting there has to be a way to balance both the philosophy
mm,
of Apollo and the
mm,
philosophy of
mm,
Dionysus. There's got to be a way
mm,
we can balance both
mm,
within ourselves and
mm.
in our interpersonal relationships. Finding a balance between structure and fluidity, finding a
Yeah.
balance between reason and emotion,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, so this other quote, which I
Mm.
really like from the chapter that I
Okay.
pulled, is healthy personality involves a balance
Mm,
between receptivity and manipulation, between wonder and
mm.
action.
Okay.
So that relates to
Mm.
kind of what I was saying, it's
Right.
I teach meditation and
Right.
yoga and I
Right.
understand the value of
Mm,
meditation,
mm.
but it can become overly self-indulgent if
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
apply
Mm,
that in a practical social sense. If there's no
mm.
social application to it, if you don't ever
Right.
take any actions
Mm,
and you just sit there as like all day
mm.
wondering
Right.
what purpose does that serve? It comes to a
Right.
point where it feels excessively self-indulgent, right?
Right.
So he's talking about
Mm,
the timing,
mm,
finding time to wonder and finding
mm.
time to use that
Yeah.
wonder and apply it with action.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what
Mm,
I get from this quote. And that's why I really
yeah.
like this quote. And he's also saying
Mm,
to live
mm,
authentically. It is within our
mm,
human nature to
mm.
wonder, and it is
Yeah.
within in our human nature to
Mm,
act. We're
yeah.
not built just to sit and wonder all day. We're built
Right.
to move.
Yeah. Right.
Um, so it seems like he's saying we must have a balance between openness with
Mm,
agency. Too much
mm,
self-control stifles
mm.
wonder. Too
Yeah.
much passivity, it
Mm,
dissolves direction. So the art
right.
of living is moving gracefully between awe and
Mm,
action. So I don't know, but what do you think about this
mm.
particular
Yeah.
quote? Can you relate
Mm,
to it personally, professionally?
yeah. Yeah. A lot of times, people might think of these kinds of dichotomies as an either or choice. And I think it's more accurate to think of it as a spectrum. And they're fully intertwined, like one doesn't exist without the other. Um, so some societies might be like 30% Apollo and 70% Dionysus if you're trying to put a number on it, or maybe the French are more Dionysian than Apollo, and
Yeah.
the Germans are more Apollo than Dionysus. Yeah, even though in that case, like Romanticism actually comes from Germany, like the in the Western world, like you know, so they're it's a mixed bag. It's not like one or the. That's an example of how it's not one-sided, or the United States. There's a lot of order and structure here, but we also, seriously value freedom and individualism. And like Henry Ford said, history is bunk. Like he just like, the structure of the past, the aristocracy of the past, all those rigid categories and social ladders that were predefined. And if your father did this, you had to do that, that kind of thing. America bucked that, in a lot of ways. But um, there has to be order and structure to function. So I think it's a mistake, like as to pick America as an example, a lot of Americans think you just sprinkle freedom on anything, it makes it better. It's like magic fairy dust. And whether we're talking about social norms or economics or whatever, what I try to say is partly why I'm into this stuff is like, okay, look at nature. There's no freedom in nature without structure. I can't, if you try to think about it, there's no unlimited freedom. It doesn't exist.
Hmm.
So just as perfection doesn't exist. Like these are concepts that, for whatever reason, our psychology is drawn to doing. Um, but I think we step back and, talk about it, be like, okay, you know, this may be the way we want it, but it's not how it is. So one thing I wanted to say from earlier is that a simple way I've come up with to describe these two systems, like Dionysus and Apollo, is that as far as where they go pathological, or how you could say toxic, or however you want to say it, when Apollo goes too far, it becomes neurotic or neuroticism. When
Mm.
Dionysus goes too far, it becomes disintegration or destruction.
Mm. Yeah.
So like, so
Self-destruction. Yeah.
yeah. So like one like illustration of that that's kind of sensational is, well, look at the 60s and people getting on LSD, and some people lost their minds because
Yeah.
they had a bad trip or they took too much or however, whatever happened. Maybe certain people's psychology were too sensitive to it.
Hmm.
And like I love Pink Floyd, and the lead singer of Pink Floyd, Sid Barrett, did a lot of LSD, and he was no longer able to function in the band, so he had to be
Yeah.
replaced.
Yeah.
That's a classic example. But that certainly doesn't happen to most people that take LSD. But for some people, because everyone's psychology is different,
Yeah.
so and their biology is different. So uh, yeah, so this stuff is really meaningful to me because I have really strong Dionysus in me,
Mhm.
really strong. So I dream often of not. I have a constant fantasy of not having a body because it's so annoying to me. I would much rather live in my mind. Um, and I mean, I like the body sensations, but it's just such a hassle. Like to have limits. Like I like sleeping, but I don't want to have sleep when nature tells me to sleep.
Yeah.
Like nighttime is my favorite time because like the rest of the world is asleep and mostly, and I can do what I want. The world's not asking me to do anything, but I perceive the daytime as Apollo basically.
Yeah.
And so, and I have super severe ADHD, so my dopamine levels are really low. So, like I can get into self-destructive behaviors or just unhealthy, things by just pursuing stimulation after stimulation. Like
Hmm.
for me, like with sugar, or just like staying up really late, or like, having 4 hour, 5 hour conversations with friends when I really need to go home, go to sleep, so I can just go in the pleasure direction. I'm a sensualist in a lot of ways like that. So I'm an artist, musician. So like I can be lost in, even to the point where I don't enjoy it anymore, but I'm just still pursuing the pleasure, 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 but I also have really strong Apollo. So like where I can be very rigid and rule oriented and judgmental, so I just knew I had those things. And I also was just trying to understand, like, what makes an individual life or society become I was looking for a paradigm. And last thing I'll say on that is that in my early mid 20s, I was really finding philosophy and I was getting into it. I was idealist. I thought, if everyone just started thinking philosophy, it would fix the world. I didn't literally think that, but I think subconsciously I just thought, well, people just need to read more books and, because that was what was thrilling me at the time. And I was very idealistic and thought that, I was activist and stuff. So, but I was trying to come up with philosophy of everything, which later like led me to get excited about this book when I found it. But I came up with a simple way of saying that I think everything in reality is three things simultaneously: independent, dependent, and interdependent. And so everything, I think you talk about the sun, or you talk about particles or quarks or electrons or a squirrel or a tree, or like it's all interdependent, it's all independent, and it's all dependent. So my idea was that if you go too far in any one of those, it becomes toxic. So that's very similar to, but the way you apply it to Dionysus or Apollo, I think, is that you'd say interdependence is more like Dionysus and independence is more like Apollo. Because Apollo is
Hmm.
about like having control and consciousness, like where you have control of your consciousness and you're like ordering things and you're making plans, you take action, and then and the interdependence where you're always connected to something else, like an octopus.
Yeah.
Like everything's octopus and you don't have any distinctions. And I'm not, I'm not literally saying that, but I'm just saying, if you don't have boundaries, like just in relationships, like if you don't know where you stop and you start, I can go on and on, but you get the idea. So
Yes. No, I think you brought up some really
yeah.
interesting points. I can
Mm,
personally relate to a
mm,
lot of what you said.
mm,
Um, as far as I feel like there's an Apollo and a
mm, mm.
Dionysus in all of us, right? And
Sure.
sometimes we
Yeah.
might lean a little more towards
Mm,
Apollo.
yeah.
Sometimes we might lean a little more towards
Mm,
Dionysus.
yeah.
Um, there's definitely both in me.
Mm,
And whenever I feel like my life is starting to feel too
mm,
structured, too
mm,
predictable, I get bored and I
mm,
want to stir up some chaos.
right.
However,
Mm,
I definitely try to catch myself
mm,
when I'm losing a sense of self, when I'm
mm,
losing a sense of boundaries as an
mm,
actor,
mm.
especially
Sure. Yeah.
because as an actor, we often, and even as in my lifestyle as a yoga teacher,
Mm,
and I talk to a lot of people that are into like new age
mm,
ideas and different types of
yeah.
spiritual practices and
Right.
meditation.
Mm,
um, so both as an actor and as
mm,
like a yoga teacher,
mm.
I often hear this concept of ego death,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
feel like you can compare the id is sort of
Mm,
like
right.
Dionysus because the
Right.
id is just sort of our primitive
Right.
natural instincts without
Mm,
boundaries, without
right.
fear, without limits, right?
Right.
That's kind of like
Right.
the id within us. And the
Mm,
ego is more rational,
uh,
more reasoning, has more
mm,
of like
mm,
understands consequences, the ego.
mm.
But
Right.
then you often
Yeah.
hear like, oh, you have
Mm,
to let go of your ego.
yeah.
But I also think the term ego can be
Mm,
applied in different contexts, like,
uh,
you know, um, but when it comes to sort of like a sense of self, a sense of
uh,
static self, as an
right.
actor, the more practice I have acting and
Mm,
playing characters, the more I
mm,
lose touch with like a sense of concrete
yeah.
static self because I feel like
Mm,
who I am can
mm,
constantly shift and change in any
right.
moment.
Yep.
Um, but that's why I practice meditation and I
Mm,
practice yoga because I feel like those practices help remind me that there is something
mm,
unique to my brain, to my body,
mm,
that it is limited in terms of its boundaries. Like I'm not this limitless, I am confined to this body. I am
mm,
confined to this brain,
right.
so I have
Mm,
to ground myself.
mm,
Um, and so I feel like this his writing really
mm,
speaks to me
yeah.
professionally and
Mm,
personally
right.
in that regard
Mm,
because I feel like actors who aren't
mm,
grounded can go a
right.
little crazy and
Sure. Sure.
confuse reality versus
Sure.
art, right?
Mm,
If you become too like Dionysus
mm,
and you think that you become your character, it
right.
can be psychologically damaging. It can become
Right.
like a what Keane calls a
Mm,
pathology. It can become
right.
toxic. if you
right,
don't have that sense
mm,
of groundedness
mm,
of Apollo. You said something else that was really
mm,
interesting. You said there is no freedom without structure.
right,
And I found that really interesting
mm,
because I feel like um, the moments in life where we feel free,
uh-huh,
we forget that we are still operating within bounds, within
right,
limits, because we're
right,
always limited by the rules of society, but
mm,
also like we're limited by our own physics,
right,
right?
right,
So, and whenever I'm teaching yoga, I always
mm,
talk about like finding freedom within the form,
mm,
sort of like a musician. Like I know you play
mm,
music, right?
right,
I think
right,
it's important to learn the basic chords, to
right,
learn the structure, and
right,
then finding freedom within
mm,
the form. Or like a
right,
dancer, like I'm a
mm,
dancer.
right,
And one of the things I love about dancing, especially
mm,
like partner dancing, is that
mm,
you learn the structure.
mm,
And then you start finding freedom within that
mm,
structure, freedom within
right,
the form. But there's
yeah,
still like the structure there, there's
right,
still some structure. So I thought that was
right,
like a really interesting point
mm,
and very applicable um, to different aspects of life. And it reminds me of
mm,
dance, it reminds me of music,
right,
and science too. I feel
yeah,
like we can often think of scientists as leaning towards like the concept of Apollo,
uh-huh,
like pragmatic,
mm,
logical
right,
structure,
mm,
evidence-based, yeah.
mm,
But without an imagination, without a sense
right,
of wonder,
right,
science becomes dull and
right,
restrictive
yeah,
and boring, you know? So that's
yeah,
why it's so important to have both. So this is the next quote that
okay,
I really liked.
okay,
Apollo is the god of ego, light, reason, order, discipline, and balance. The happy man, having learned the proper limits of humanity, follows the way of moderation. So that's kind of like what we're talking about is finding that sense of moderation, finding that freedom within order,
mm,
right? Not
mm,
losing your sense of discipline, but
mm,
finding ways to be spontaneous and finding novelty along the way. So, this idea of having clarity within
mm,
structure, as
mm,
opposed to just abandoning structure and being
right,
anarchists
mm,
and like completely
right,
wild and
mm,
losing all sense of control.
mm,
So, I feel like in some ways, wisdom begins with order.
okay,
Like you have to have the order first,
mm,
but then wisdom dies in like over control. I mean, what do you
mm.
think about this quote?
Yeah, so three things I think about. Uh, one, I just label them and talk about them. First is Aristotle's golden mean. The second is Stoicism's equanimity. And then the third is dialectical behavior therapy, wise mind from dialectical behavior therapy. So the first one, Aristotle is famous for coming up with the concept of the law of non-contradiction. So technically, it was A is not non-A. I think is how you say it. Um, so it's basically distinctions, saying um, basically that there are contradictions and there are distinctions. So um, depending on how you're defining the parameters, um, things can be the opposite. You know, so it's just law of non-contradiction. It's that word contradiction is the main part of that. So just saying that there are contradictions. So like, I am not you, you are not me. Even though there's a lot of commonality, that see us leaning more Apollo. Um, so and there's a reaction against that actually by 20th century philosophers like in postmodernism, like Foucault. Like Foucault talked about, I'm not an expert on Foucault, but what I've some of the quotes I've seen and some of the summaries of his work, he thought that distinctions were violence, because he was referencing, some of the atrocities or oppressions of some Western imperialism, where making these distinctions was like, oh, this is the higher class, the lower class. Oh, you're a man. Oh, you're a woman. a man. Oh, so with distinctions, so if you have distinctions, then you create hierarchies, and hierarchies are oppressive. You know, um, so that's like a I'm sorry, a vertical distinctions. And so the Dionysian, or some people would say the archetypal feminine versus archetypal masculine, not sex, but like conceptual. That the archetypal feminine emphasizes oneness and collaboration, and then the hierarchy is more like who's in charge of who in the staircase kind of thing. So I'm just relating all that back to Aristotle's non-contradiction, is making distinctions versus the instinct that you see among hippies and New Age followers. Like everything is one, or some Eastern traditions like Taoism. It's all one. And
Yeah.
uh, I'm in a book group, uh, and we actually discussed this chapter because I got a chance to pick my choice. And one of the persons in there is very much has studied Buddhism for a long time and has studied that in Taoism. And so he was saying that Keen was in the chapter is not really emphasizing Eastern traditions. And I couldn't I first read the book 2005. I've been rereading it the last few months. So I don't remember. I can't remember every part of it. I don't remember how much he talks about Eastern things, but I know he was well versed in it. Um, but what I pointed out is that even though traditions in the East, like Buddhism and Taoism, were popular to a degree, those societies were incredibly structured, at least as structured as Western society. Like think of, and the philosophies that dominated were not Buddhism and Taoism; those are minor. The Hinduism dominated India, and Confucianism dominated China. And those are very traditional, very structured hierarchies. I could explain that because I, teach to a degree. I can explain it because, I teach world history at the high school level, so I talk about that. Um, but so the perception, a lot of, I say liberals and hippies and new age people, which I have, a lot of affinity with. Like I call myself a city hippie, and I'm very much a mystic. I'm like an atheistic mystic now, or maybe you could say almost a religious naturalist or something. But like again, this is an example of Dionysus and Apollo having to come together because those societies they did not like live in a oneness of mystical like. And I know a lot about the history of yoga, and those yogis or those mystical people, they were unusual. They weren't they didn't say everyone is supposed to drop out of society and do that. That was a special role. Just like in the Christian faith, there were monks and mystics. They have a special role. And so people would go to the monasteries to learn from them and then go back to regular life.
Hmm.
And then the second thing with Stoicism, the Stoicism, one of the aspects is equanimity, like being internally calm. And one of the methods from Stoicism is basically accept realistic worst case scenario, and
Yeah.
meditate on that so that you can be at peace. And it's a continual reset, a continual reflection and renewal and, meditation, all that stuff on. And then the third thing was dialectical behavior therapy, which for those who don't know, it's a branch of cognitive behavioral therapy. And I found the tools in it very useful. The concept of wise mind, which I'll explain a little bit. Um, it was designed by a lady named Marcia Linehan back in the 90s. She's a professor, I think, University of Washington. And she designed it to help people have borderline personality disorder. People have a lot of emotional turmoil, and it helps so many people. It's like one of the most research-based therapies. But it has, similar to the 12-step programs that help people with, it's just an example of, 12 steps is designed for addiction, but a lot of the principles in there could be used by someone that's not an addict, because it's
Mhm.
like the same kind of tools that can get you healthy when you're unhealthy can keep you healthy. So, you know, um, you have to have certain emergency versions of it, if you're in crisis, but it's the same basic principles like Apollo and Dionysus. It's like,
Mhm.
um, and some people's biology has taken them too far in Apollo, like maybe some forms of autism or neuroticism, and then their biology could take them in Dionysus, like schizophrenia or something like that, or borderline. Like I have a relative that a lot of other my relative friends that have had counselors, we've told our counselors about that relative, and um, they like sure they have borderline by their behavior. And my understanding of borderline is like that someone is suffering so much that something that wouldn't seem like would hurt them, like just totally torturing to them. And so people around them don't understand why that person's acting so extreme emotional, or their emotions are going from 0 to 60. So anyway, I'm saying that's what a dialectical behavior theory was there to help for. So it ties into Apollo Dionysus to a degree because, or to a large degree, because it's the concept of a wise mind. So it's emotion mind and rational mind. And so it's
Hmm.
embracing both rational mind, but finding wise mind to kind of ground you and to kind of orchestrate those two. Um, and it has definitely connections to Buddhism. I mean, both the 12 steps and DBT have a lot of roots in Buddhism. So
Hmm.
if you think about Buddhism, just kind of accepting the limits of life, including the suffering,
Yeah.
and so that you can enjoy things without being lost in. I know part of that's like being lost in over desire. Anyway, I can go on, but it's just those kinds of things what I think about.
Yeah, I can see how all of those different concepts relate to what Keen's
Mm.
saying, for
Yeah.
sure. This is another quote I liked
Mm.
because it's by Alan Watts.
Okay.
And Alan Watts is a philosopher I like to
Mm.
listen to
Mm.
whenever I'm trying to get in a more Dionysus state.
Uh-huh.
Um, one of the beauties of practicing meditation and
Mm.
yoga is that I
Mm.
think it can activate, we talk about our left and right brain,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
Left being more logical,
Mm.
right being more creative, artistic,
Mm.
sensory,
Mm.
right? Our right brain is more Dionysian way, right?
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
left brain is a
definitely.
little more logical. So
Right.
whenever I start feeling like I want to do something creative,
Uh-huh.
like writing a comedy script or
Mm.
writing, a film
Mm.
script, I will often practice yoga because I
Mm.
know that's going to put my brain in that
Mm.
state. And then
Okay.
other times I'll listen to
Mm.
Alan Watts because
Okay.
Alan Watts, he's
Mm.
very Dionysian in his
Right. Right.
in
Right.
his ramblings.
Yeah.
And sometimes he doesn't make a whole lot
Mm.
of rational sense.
Yeah.
But I feel
Uh-huh.
like cerebrally I can understand it's
Mm.
like what he's describing, he doesn't necessarily articulate, he's not appealing to the rational mind, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the quotes in Keen's writing is
Uh-huh.
there are still efforts, choices, and decisions, but not in the sense that I make them. They
Okay.
arise of themselves in relation to circumstances.
Mm.
So this also sort of brings up the idea of free will versus determinism. Like, where
Uh-huh.
do our thoughts come from? Where do our
Uh-huh.
choices come from? How
Mm.
much control do we actually have over our
Mm.
choices? Are we actually exercising free
Mm.
will?
Uh-huh.
Or
Mm.
are we just a result of circumstances? Are our
Yeah.
thoughts and choices a result of circumstances? So, what he's saying, which echoes Eastern philosophy, is
Uh-huh.
that when the ego dissolves, life acts through us
Mm.
rather than we're not controlling life. Life is sort
Mm.
of controlling us. And so
Mm.
he's sort of advocating that we need to just surrender to life's flow,
Right.
just go with the flow.
Mm.
Um,
Right. Right.
which I think has value to
Uh-huh.
an extent.
Uh-huh.
But I also think practically, from a practical
Uh-huh.
standpoint,
Mm.
if you don't have any structure in your life, if you don't have
Uh-huh.
any schedule, I
Mm.
mean, it's a slippery slope to
Mm.
madness.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So,
Mm.
I don't know. I appreciate Alan
Mm.
Watts a lot, and I like this
Right.
quote,
Mm.
but I also think that it's I agree with Keen that you
Mm.
have to have that balance.
Mm.
But any thoughts about this particular quote, this Alan Watts quote?
Yeah. Because Alan Watts is famous for like in the I think 50s and 60s, he was especially 60s, he was part of the whole openness to the East.
Hmm.
And like the Beatles went to India and after I think Alan Watts was writing. So yeah, so I mean there are I'm not sure if Taoism is deterministic. Maybe it seems like it could be. like like the two forces. Like the Taoism, for example, is definitely similar to the Dionysian Apollo, like yin and yang.
Hmm.
Um, but if you see the symbol of Taoism, the black is inside the white and the white is inside the black. So I
Hmm.
think it's a good
They
image.
coexist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're interdependent. So it's not, it's not either or. It's not like you're on the accelerator, then you're on the brake. It's more like it's all part of the same system. Um, but what I was thinking about when you were talking about going with the flow or having structure, you said it a little different way, but in the last section of the book, like, or not section, it's just like the first last paragraph, he talks about when he was growing up in Delaware, the author is Sam Keen. So this will probably be like in the 40s or 50s because I think he was born in the 1930s. He just died actually, I think this year, last year, he's 90 something years old. And a side note, I did email him like 10 years ago to thank him for the book. And he told me that the book was the foundation of all his later writings because he wrote a lot of books after that, all the way. I don't know what his last book was, but he wrote a lot of books. And I'll get back to the passage of the book I was mentioning in a second. But just for those that don't know about him, like he was the editor for Psychology Today for I think about 20 years. He was Ivy League trained, like PhD um, in philosophy, theology, psychology. I'm not sure which was the PhD. I think he has two PhDs. I'm not sure, but it's a lot. So he's like, very well versed in all these things. Doesn't mean he's right, of course, but he's done his homework, and you can tell by the way he writes, the way he references intellectuals and movements, and I mean, he was only like I think 40 years old when he wrote it, so or something like that. Because 1969. Um, anyway, he was right at 40 or under 40 because I looked it up one time. So it's pretty
Mhm.
amazing. I mean, that's enough life experience, but still, it's just like the amount of dedication it would take to have this understanding. Now, the Dionysus Apollo thing. He got that from Nietzsche because Nietzsche was that was his idea. Um, King just had a spin on it. But anyway, the last part of the chapter, he talks about growing up in Delaware and that he lived or visited a waterway where the a river entered the ocean. Um, and so it's two different currents. And the current from the river, I think, was calmer than the ocean, or maybe just when they came together, it was very turbulent. And he said some people died there because they tried to swim and they couldn't handle it. So he liked risk, and he actually wrote books about risk later. I think one called like The Art of Flying or Learning to Fly or something like that. Because he actually became a trapeze artist later in life, like in his
So
60s or
cool.
something. Like when he had like a trapeze machine, a big thing with net and everything in his backyard. So when he was like, I think he started when he was like 60 or 70 years old doing that. So
Cool.
he tried to explore these things. But anyway, so he would swim there, um, and he to take on the danger. But what he learned is that he had to use a combination of releasing effort and using effort, or else he
Mhm.
couldn't pull it off.
Yeah.
So there are times to swim hard and times to just go because we have limited energy and very limited power compared to the universe. You
Yeah.
know, even if you just try to resist two or three people, like
Yeah.
or like I'm a teacher, so like if I tried to resist the energy of a room of 30 kids, I will lose.
Right.
I, I cannot muscularly with my voice or my body or anything like that, I cannot control them. If they all decided to go against me, they would beat me in a second. Not just physically, but just energy.
Yeah.
So like, what do you do with that? And so, because clearly there are lots of human beings that are able to, overpower other people, but I think you have to like analyze it. How do they do that?
Yeah.
It's a lot of different combinations, but it's not just pure muscularity. You know what I mean? It's not just somebody like a lot of times the leaders are not the strongest people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other aspects.
Hmm. Yeah, so I feel like kind of it seems like what you're getting at in relation to this quote is
Mm,
that um sometimes in life we have to go with the flow instead of trying to
mm,
control the flow.
mm,
Because if we try to resist the flow
mm,
of life,
mm.
that's when things become harder and we drown, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I guess that raises the question, though, at what times in life do we try to take control?
Mm-hmm.
And at what times in life do we surrender, and how do we find
Mm-hmm.
that balance? So that's sort of what Keen is getting us
Mm-hmm.
to think about is at what times in life is it good to try to take control and to
Mm-hmm.
try to um, not necessarily like follow the herd, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at what times is it best to
Mm-hmm.
surrender? That balance of control and surrender, that balance of power and grace.
Mm-hmm.
So in my life, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like as a personal example, if I'm taping, and this is just how it relates to me, like if I'm
Mm-hmm.
taping an audition,
Mm-hmm.
that's when I'm trying to take control and I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to create the best character I can
Mm-hmm.
and enjoy trying to have fun creating a
Yeah.
character and just submit the audition. But then
Yeah.
after I submit the audition, I completely let it go. And then I
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
I
Like a
don't,
costume. You took off the costume, right?
yeah, I don't try to
Yeah.
hold on to the character, but I
Uh,
also don't try to get attached to the results of the
okay.
audition. Because if I
Okay.
start trying to get attached to the results,
Yeah.
the average working actor books one out of 100 auditions on average.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I always
Yeah.
practice the art of non-attachment, which is
One out
also
of
sort
100.
of
That's
like
a lot.
that's
Jeez.
yeah,
One out of
it's an
100.
Eastern philosophy, not
Yeah.
attaching to an
Okay.
outcome of a
Mm.
situation.
Okay.
But when you're in the present moment, taking
Mm.
self-responsibility
Mm.
and making conscious controlled choices,
Mm.
setting goals, right?
Mm.
Setting goals, but not getting too attached to the outcome of those
Mm.
goals. So that's how I've sort of found my balance in life
Mm.
because I don't want to live my life and just like let other people direct me and go with the
Mm.
flow. That's too
Mm.
Dionysian, right? I
Yeah.
also don't want to live my life like where I'm a control freak and that if things don't
Mm.
go my way, I don't know how to
Mm.
handle it, right? So
Right.
that's how I've personally
Mm. Yeah.
adapted this
Mm.
concept.
I look at I just jump in real quick. Uh you know where I what I've observed is that you seem to be very disciplined. Like
Yeah, I have a
you
lot
kind
of
of
a
have to be, right? So
yeah.
right.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to like my
Mm.
goals,
Uh,
I have to be
mm.
disciplined when it comes
Uh,
to goal setting,
uh,
but also like letting go of the results.
okay.
Um, and being okay with not achieving those goals.
Yeah, yeah,
Finding happiness just no matter what happens, right?
yeah.
And also just accepting what I can't control, because I have some control, or I like
Mm.
to think I have some control over my own choices, but I can't control what anyone else does, so. Um, but going back to the text,
Mm.
so
Yeah, yeah.
this is another quote that Keene wrote in the
Mm.
text. Zorba the Greek
Yeah,
stated,
yeah.
"You need a touch of folly to be free. If a man doesn't break the string, what flavor is left in life? The flavor of chamomile, weak tea." First of all, I have to object a little bit just because I like the taste of chamomile tea.
Okay. Mm.
But if I didn't like the taste of chamomile tea, I understand what he's going for. And he's sort of reminding us that real freedom, it carries a little touch of madness, right? Because if we're too
Okay.
structured, if we're too organized,
Uh-huh.
then we lose touch with that sense of like playfulness,
Mm.
curiosity and wonder,
Uh-huh.
right? And without taking any risks in life,
Mm.
life loses its flavor, right? You
Mm.
have to take some risks if you're
Mm.
going to learn new things and develop new skills
Mm.
and create new relationships. I mean, there's
Right.
always a risk, right?
Right.
So I like how Keene sort of uses this quote to argue that a truly alive person, it must sometimes let go of reason and sort
Yeah.
of taste the wildness of
Mm.
being.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I'm dancing, like as a
Uh-huh.
dancer, that's what it feels like. It feels like I'm letting go of my logical mind, and
Uh,
I'm just like feeling the freedom in my body. Like my body feels
mm,
free. And as a result, my mind feels free
yeah.
in that moment when I'm dancing.
Mm,
So, but that's just me. I mean, what do you think?
mm. Well, I mean, uh, I would like to say something about your Pilates class because I've been to your Pilates class. So, and just as an example, like a lot of the Pilates is so difficult, and I say that as someone who's done a lot of yoga, and I've done a lot of sports. Um, but a lot of it's so difficult that I couldn't do some rational work because my every bit of my brain is needed to make it through because you're holding a pose and then you're holding a pose plus then you're being asked to move a limb while you're already holding a pose, and it's what your body doesn't normally do. So like your body is like it's at I'm almost crisis. It's like it's a healthy crisis, but it's you don't have. I don't think you could really do much rational thinking, and that's if you're really trying, to do it. So I think that's an example. Like certain activities don't allow for other parts of your brain to be activated because your resources are being taxed. And a lot of times I like to. I'm the kind of person that tries to be as generally comprehensive as I can. Like I understand that I can't understand everything, but I just try, and I mean it's driven me crazy a lot of times, like where I just because I would be so lost in the I love research and reading and digging and constantly exercising my brain. Like I said, I fantasize about not having a body, um, but I can like I might need to go to the bathroom and I wait like an hour, because I'm lost in my reading, I'm thinking I'm like I don't want to get up. I'm in the zone, and or uh, I need to go to sleep or whatever. And so like a lot of my art and music and my writing, like it would not have happened if I hadn't gone into zones outside the norm, like and pushed like way pushed really far. Like there are certain things that I discovered, and I like for me personally, I'm not married, don't have kids, and usually didn't have a girlfriend. So I had tons of time, like just to explore these things. I could spend the whole weekend just reading, or I could spend the whole weekend like just sitting out in nature and drawing. And so I had that luxury, and so even someone, let's say that was and this is kind of like the Dionysian in a sense. So even someone who was an aristocrat 200 years ago, they couldn't have done what I did because they didn't have all the medical support. A lot of them wouldn't be able to live this long, but they didn't have access to all the tools and knowledge and the resources. I mean, we have our modern life, we have access to things that kings didn't have access to even 50 years ago. So what I'm getting at is like the possibilities for pleasure and enjoyment are so vast, but we have a comparison brain. It's like, well, you know, I could, have another channel to watch on YouTube, or I could, eat. I look at all the sweets that are in the grocery store or the convenience store. You could take it so much further, but that's why I love history. I'm a context person, so like the context, like um, our desires can be insatiable. Like there's no limit to it.
Mm,
But if we take a step back and be like, in the Middle Ages, they were so happy to get any kind of salt or sugar at all because their diet was monotonous. They ate the same thing every day their whole life, like very basic.
mm,
And so what I'm getting at is that a meditation, which I think is useful, is to think about those people. Like, and a lot of them found some kind of happiness because they wrote about it.
mm,
But if you could be like, today there's plenty of unhappy billionaires, partly because they're like, well, that person has an island, and I only have a little tiny island. He has a big island, or he has three yachts. I only have one yacht. Like, there's no end to it. Like, Elon Musk can be upset because he doesn't have a trillion. What I'm saying? It's that's what I mean. The Dionysus and Apollo and I mean, a lot of the stuff I talk about with my friends about these things or my students is that part of unhappiness for human beings is connected to our imagination because we can imagine other scenarios. Like a squirrel, as far as I know, a squirrel or a cow or a pig, they don't have our capacity for imagination, as far as I know. So they're probably not experiencing the varieties of misery we have. They have plenty of misery, because all animals suffer. But I think just as we can imagine utopias, like in religions and heavens and things like that, whether or not they exist, there's so many versions of it. It's like that has to have something to do with our imagination because they
Hmm.
can't all be true. They contradict each other. The different stories, the different heavens, or the different utopias. Like a communist utopia is different than a capitalist utopia. If or whatever. An ideal world. So I'm just getting at the fact that with our imagination, it can become a problem because we're frustrated, but we actually made up the thing we think we're supposed to have. That's what I mean by the limits of Apollo. Apollo could be like a meditation practice to say, okay, like it happens to me because I love sugar, and like I can eat so much sugar and function where other people would feel sick. I can just keep going, and I know it's bad for me. So like, and I will just be tempted on the way home to just drop by and get another something. And there's endless varieties, at the store, and so many gas stations. And I would just like savor it, be like kind of like someone who loves brewery. They're like, I want to try all the beers. I just keep on like, oh, I want this ice cream. Okay, I can mix this ice cream with this, and so I think context is helpful to meditate on like, well, historically, there are all these people that wrote about being happy. They didn't have any of this,
Hmm.
so it's just, and I think that's part of like why we destroy the environment because we just consume, 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 and we already live in so much abundance already,
Right.
and we're not even sharing with each other. Like I'm not saying we should give everything that we own to other people, but we're hoarding. Like we have so much more than we need, and there are people that are in the world that living on $1 a day,
Yeah.
and like, and we're just like, well, I don't have the latest BMW, or I don't, even me, I don't have a lot of money, but I mean, I live in such convenience. Like I have an air conditioned house. There are plenty of people in the world don't have air conditioning. I have hot water, those kinds of things. So I'm just getting at I guess I'm, I'm broadening this out a lot, but I'm saying like Dionysus to me is a lot about pleasure, openness to pleasure. That's not all it is, but um, it's wonderful. But what I'm getting at is that we can reimagine the structure of that pleasure. Like it's very much based on assumptions and perceptions, and like that can be altered, that can be changed.
Yeah.
What you think you had to have, like maybe an alcoholic or whoever, like I gotta have this just to function. Like
Mhm.
a lot of writers, the past 100 years have thought they need alcohol to be creative. Like Ernest
Yeah.
Hemingway thought that. And then the book called The Artist's Way. I don't know if you've heard of The Artist's Way by
Yes.
Julia Cameron.
Yes. Yes.
Like, she was an alcoholic and she got healthy through 12 steps. And then she made a 12-step book that's about being a healthy creative, having
Hmm.
creative recovery.
Yeah.
And she believed that. She believed she was a screenwriter, and so she
Mhm.
thought she needed alcohol to help her be creative. And so, like a lot of people I'll wrap up my comment with this, that a lot of people look at my art and my music and be like, it's so psychedelic because it is. My stuff is really. Like my interest in history came from being fascinated by my parents' generation in the late '60s and the psychedelic, and I love rock music and psychedelic rock from the late '60s, early '70s. Trying to understand all that, the hippies, I was fascinated by all that. But I don't. I'm not using drugs and I think if anybody looked at my music or my art, I think they could say it's as experimental as almost. I'm not saying it's better than other people's, but it's as experimental as anything I know out there. And
Yeah.
so what I'm getting at is that there's so many ways to get to the same result. You don't have to go into like endless. I mean, that's just drugs as an example. Like you need drugs for creativity. There's just as much but you might have to do some adjustments. Like
Hmm.
you can reach, I'm sure from yoga and meditation, you can reach psychedelic states without drugs. It's a different,
Absolutely.
it's a
Yeah.
different one. It's a different one.
Hmm.
And it's not as fast,
Yeah.
but it might be more sustainable, or
Yeah.
deepening, right?
Yeah, because certain breathing techniques can
Mm,
activate parts of your brain
mm,
and relax your nervous
mm,
system to the point where you're so relaxed, you're more susceptible to creative thought.
mm,
A lot of people turn to alcohol just because it
mm.
relaxes them. But when
Yeah.
you learn breath work and breathing
Mm,
techniques that relax your nervous
mm,
system and movement, like
mm,
yoga, that
mm,
relax your nervous system and it changes the chemistry of your brain to the point where
mm,
you're more susceptible to creative thought. So there's so many natural ways
mm.
that you can get into a creative state.
Right,
So it seems like if you're able to create art that looks like you were high making it,
right,
you're
right.
just naturally getting to that
Mm,
state without,
mm,
drugs. You
mm,
said something interesting
mm,
that I wanted to touch on
mm.
about you think that perhaps if we didn't have an imagination, we
Uh,
wouldn't suffer as much
right.
because if we weren't imagining our
Mm,
lives being better, we
mm,
would appreciate what we have more. Yeah, and I
yeah.
think there's a lot of merit to that.
Mm,
However, I also feel like
mm,
the imagining that things can be better can also be comforting when you're struggling through something. By
right.
using your imagination,
Mm,
like this, if you're in
mm,
a circumstance that's really
mm,
hard, but you
yeah.
can imagine the future
Mm,
better, I think that's really helpful.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I also feel like if you can imagine the life that you want, you have
Mm,
to that's the first step towards getting to the life that you want is
mm,
imagining what you want and then
mm,
taking practical steps to get
mm,
there.
mm,
But I think what you were touching on is
mm,
that we might think that our level of happiness is going to change drastically
mm,
once we achieve certain things in life or what,
mm,
we think we need a certain house or a certain wife or a certain lifestyle to be happy.
mm,
And we forget the fact that like that thing is not what's making us happy, but it's the story we tell ourselves about that thing. It's
mm,
our happiness is still coming from within.
mm,
It's coming from within our own brains, our own bodies.
mm,
So if there is a way that we can reframe how we look at our own happiness. And that's one of the reasons, like in every yoga class I teach,
mm,
at the end of the
mm.
yoga class, I always say, think of something in your life that you're grateful for. Just
Yeah.
one thing you're grateful for.
Mm, mm,
And then you might realize that you have more to be grateful for
mm.
than you appreciate because it's
Right.
very easy to take the things that we have for granted. Um, so, yeah, I think you said a lot of valuable, interesting points. But in relation to like this text,
Right.
um, I feel like finding that balance, like using the Dionysus, using the
Mm,
imagination for
mm,
good instead of
mm.
for like comparing your life to someone else or like,
Right. Yeah.
using it as like a good thing as opposed
Mm,
to like a negative thing. This is another quote that I
mm,
really liked. The conflict between Apollonian and the Dionysian styles of life is perennial. So
mm,
I like this because he's
mm,
talking about how the struggle is eternal between
mm,
order and ecstasy, reason and passion,
mm,
and every culture
mm,
and every person must find their own dynamic balance
mm,
between these two.
mm,
Um, Authentic living to Keen
mm,
seems to be learning when to lead and then when to dance,
mm,
right? So it's sort of like as a dancer, it's like when you're partner dancing, there's a lead and there's a
mm.
follow.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a good metaphor
Mm,
for it's always that like conversation of when do I lead, when do I follow, and it's like a never-ending sort
mm,
of struggle that I think every culture has. Um, and the other quote that I really liked from a different philosopher, but that Keene
yeah.
talks about,
Uh-huh.
is by Heidegger. Philosophy does
Mm,
not begin in knowledge,
mm,
but in astonishment that being is. So I like that Heidegger calls out this sort of deep existential awe,
mm,
that there's something rather than nothing. Because
mm,
oftentimes throughout our
mm,
daily lives, we forget to be amazed that we're just
Mhm.
alive, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
any of this exists. It's easy to forget that it's kind of amazing that
Right.
we're here, that we
Mm,
have these bodies and that we're
mm,
capable of everything we experience in
mm,
life. So, and I think what Keene is sort of getting at here and why he brought this up is that a mature soul
mm,
lives with that same amazement every day, right? And to
mm,
lose astonishment
mm,
is almost like falling asleep to
mm,
the middle of existence. So,
mm,
if we live our life without that sense of wonder and
mm,
amazement, that's when life
mm,
starts feeling mundane and dull.
mm,
When we're
mm.
not operating from that place of gratitude too.
Yeah.
It's like I could look at this water and be like, there's nothing magical about this.
Yeah.
Like, what's so great about this?
Yeah.
It's like I could, I could go to the store and get one. I'm used to it because I
Right.
see it every day, right?
Right.
So it's easy to kind of not be amazed by it.
Mm,
But when I take a moment and
mm,
really take in the entire shape of it,
mm,
and then bring all my attention and all my
mm,
awareness to how it feels when I drink
mm.
it, then
Yeah.
I start feeling amazed that I'm able to experience this thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to remind ourselves to kind of
Yeah.
get to that place
Mm,
of awe
mm,
and wonder and amazement in every little thing that we do, even the most mundane tasks. Like
mm,
the other day I was doing laundry and I hate doing laundry. It seems so
mm,
boring and just
mm,
like mediocre and like,
mm,
menial.
mm,
But then
mm.
like there's something about like the warm towels that like are comforting and it's like finding beauty and awe in those little things. I think that's key to sort of being happy.
Yeah. My understanding, I think that Keene mentions this, but my understanding is that a lot of the ancient Greek philosophers thought that philosophy began in wonder.
Hmm.
Um, so, and then, Keene starts off the book talking about childlike wonder. And so for a child, everything is new and the possibilities are open. Like the child doesn't know um, that chairs always stay in one place, unless there's an earthquake.
Yeah.
Um, they don't know that um, dogs only do certain things and cats only do certain things. If you tell them when they're very young, they won't know the difference. They'll believe in Santa Claus if you tell them. You know, um, and if you if you reduce things down to just their pure function, like the utility, um, then they become discardable. They become less valuable. So and that's a lot of times what's happened with us, like not just in the modern world, but even in the past, like they had certain in traditional societies, they had we all make definitions and categorize things, and they thought this goes here and that goes there, and this is what children are for, this is what men and women are for, this is they wanted the telos, like the purpose of things, the teleology, like what's the purpose of things.
Hmm.
And so they want to make order of things. Um, but if you're too rigid with that, then if that individual thing is not doing what you think it's supposed to do, then it's discardable. So that can happen. We can apply that a million different ways. That concept. But like if like for me as a male in an American society, I'm expected to do certain things. Where I perceive that at least that I'm supposed to be tough, that I'm supposed to stay on task with goals, that I'm supposed to be um, almost oblivious to hardship or to emotions, and that I'm not supposed to be very expressive in my face or my hands because that's effeminate. You know, um, so I'm supposed to throw away those parts of me that are not like that. I'm supposed to fit in this system because um, that's how we hold back the chaos. We put things in boxes,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
but it's kind of like the example I've given to people is like if someone believes that birds can't fly, birds could be flying around them and they're going to find another explanation.
Yeah.
Say, oh,
Yeah.
that's not a bird. That's not a bird, or they're not really flying, or, so um, that's kind of what I was getting about in many points of what I was sharing tonight is that um, I think the human brain is incredibly malleable. That's what I was talking about imagination. Like we can build systems that are very, very different from each other, and they both can operate in the world. That's
Hmm.
crazy.
Yeah.
Like communism, as for example, it lasted. Like people lived in communist countries, just like capitalism lasted.
Hmm.
But those are two modern systems. That's not how the world operated until very recently.
Yeah.
So empires like the Roman Empire lasted from Roman culture lasted. The empire lasted from like right before Christ was born. All the eastern half lasted all the way to 1453. So like that's a long time. And then all these people are under oppression, right? So like an empire
Yeah.
means dominating. So I'm just going to add that as an example. Like human beings can live like that indefinitely. So
Hmm.
it's all based on what they believe and what the human body can adapt to.
Hmm.
I forget where I was going with this, but what was I talking about?
So the
uh,
quote,
yeah.
the quote
Yeah.
was a Heidegger quote at astonishment at being. So philosophy does
Mm-hmm.
not begin in knowledge, but an astonishment that being is.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I just was attaching that to the possibilities of life, and I was, just tying back to imagination that we can, um, and almost endlessly imagine things. And now, oh yeah, I was talking about childhood wonder, like and the possibilities for a child. Um, but yeah, if I mean, King talks about in the chapter. He says that if someone doesn't believe their future is open, like if they think that they can't actually impact the future,
Hmm.
then it's deadening. It.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. That's what I got from it too. That Keene is
Mm,
saying that
mm,
you don't have to like walk the path that society's telling you to walk. You
mm,
can create your own path. If you don't see the path that like lights
mm,
you up inside, you can
mm,
literally just like take some sticks,
mm,
create your own path.
mm,
That's kind of what I got from it.
mm.
And I like how he comes back to where Chesterton started
Okay.
when Chesterton said, "We need to be happy in this wonderland without once being merely comfortable."
Mm,
Because comfort is comfortable,
mm,
but if we don't ever step outside our comfort zone, we're never going
mm,
to grow. We're never going to
mm,
learn new things. We're never going to
mm,
experience new things.
mm,
And we're never going to experience that sense of like awe and
mm,
amazement if we
mm,
only stay in what's familiar and comfortable.
mm,
So he's sort of encouraging us to step outside our comfort zone, take
mm,
risks,
mm,
and broaden our horizons, so to
mm,
speak, but yet still remember that this is our home.
mm,
This specific chapter resonated with me in different levels, and I
mm,
think it's helpful for anyone who's sort of struggling with, how to navigate situations with that balance of logic and emotion, that balance
mm,
of reason and creativity.
mm,
And there is a way to
mm,
balance both. Like you were
mm,
saying, you don't
mm,
have to just pick one or the other.
mm,
So
mm,
I think there's a lot of value to this chapter, and I
mm.
want to read the rest of the book because I
Yeah.
only read this one chapter. So thank
And
you for
people
introducing me.
can, sorry, right, but just to say people can read it for free on archive.org. And you can listen to it for free there. And there's an app associated with a website called Open Library. It has millions of books. It's really awesome. It's all free. So,
Yes.
mm,
So if you're listening at home and you enjoyed this, I challenge you to read the whole book.
mm,
And if you're listening to this on YouTube, comment
mm,
below. Let us know what
mm,
you think about anything we've shared. If you agree with us, disagree with us, I'd be curious to know your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going. I think it's important to talk about these ideas and get a little closer to living more um, productive, healthy, and balanced lives, you know? So, any final thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, well, one thing I thought about is that when we talk about like how to um, process the Dionysus and Apollo, or you could say freedom and structure, or order and chaos, one aspect is I would say trust, the concept of trust, and also the concept of community. So now community, like you were mentioning, like if if you only go with what people tell you, or your environment, or if you're not making choices for yourself, then of course that's not healthy. That's why I go back to the everything in reality is three things simultaneously: independence, dependence, and interdependence. So if you're
Mhm.
too interdependent, you lose your sense of self. But if
Yes.
but if you're too independent, you lose a sense of interconnection and interwovenness and things like that.
Yes.
So for me, when I've had the deepest struggles of my life, as far as like sadness or feeling like I was coming apart, the only way I was able to build out of that was to trust that the people in my life who said they cared about me actually did, and to trust that they did have some wisdom, and not that they're infallible or anything like that, but that it was worth taking some of their advice or worth believing in myself. And like one thing we didn't talk about is the inner critic and perfectionism and things like that. One thing I thought about related to that, we were talking way back, is that like people already see us as we are, a certain way. And we might think we're like maybe the Apollo, like blocking it out, but like they already see us, and so the last thing is that one of my other favorite authors named Matthew Fox. He's a very similar author. He's still alive. He's a mystic teacher. He was a Catholic theologian, became an Episcopal priest, but he's written a lot of amazing books. His first book is called Original Blessing. It's like it's as opposed to like original sin, like looking at the world as a blessing. And one of my favorite quotes from that I memorized, he says, "Recover faith as trust, um, and a willingness to grow and expand." Because he was the founder of or reviver of creation-centered spirituality. In other words, like spirituality based in nature, and he taught about all different world religions and how to like find the similar to Keen, like how to find the essence of those without necessarily believing in the literalness of any of them, just the
Yeah.
insights of them.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend people check him out. He's super deep, super intellectual, but also very much in the mystical. But he when he said trust, he was talking about trusting in basically the wonder of nature, like the groundedness, the repetitiveness of nature, and also the possibilities, the wonder of nature. So recover faith as trust and a willingness to grow and expand. Like that's one that I memorized because I would look for something to be continuous, something that's solid. It's a book about mostly coming from the Christian perspective,
Okay.
and the emphasis on original sin, like saying that human beings are innately corrupt because of Adam and Eve and that kind of thing. And he's saying, yes, there is evil in the world, but the context of it is something good. It's nature. It's the creation. And our bodies are wonderful. They're not something to despise, and they're not something to reject. Like there's creation centered spirituality is looking at reality as a blessing, as a wonder, as immensely or even infinitely valuable,
Hmm.
sacred.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, he's saying that like we need to center ourselves in that. Like um, it's that's probably what led me out of Christianity, was what I thought was like a truncated gospel, or like where it's sin, salvation, problem, solution, problem, solution, like it's to me it was like trying to solve cancer without studying the human body. Like how does the human body work healthily? Like if you
Hmm.
just study the disease without the context in which the healthy organism operates, then you're going to damage the organism because you're just trying to get rid of the disease.
Hmm.
Like you have, yeah, you have to understand how the other organs work, because if you try to extract the disease, you don't understand how they integrate, then
Hmm.
you kill the organism or you harm it.
Hmm.
So he was saying that if you're trying to deal with evil, but you don't understand like what this was intended to be or what it's capable of doing or how it functions healthily, you're gonna like use a hammer where it's not so it doesn't need a hammer. Maybe it needs
Yeah.
sandpaper. Maybe and so like an example of this, he was basically saying you need a theology of the body. You need a understanding of the goodness of the body itself, because there's a lot of self-loathing and kind of hatred of the body for a lot of like religions where they're like, material world is bad, spiritual world is
Right.
good, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And he's saying, no, 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 that's like the physical world. If you're religious, like that was made on, if you're a Christian, like, or a Jew or a Muslim, like that, it was made with a lot of care
Yeah.
by God. It wasn't just something to throw away, you
Hmm.
know. Oh,
Yeah.
but
And it also,
yeah,
yeah, going
but
with what you're saying, it also
mm,
sort of raises the
mm,
question, like,
yeah,
um, you know,
mm,
going with the idea that God created our
mm,
bodies. Why would
mm,
God create our bodies in a way that would be shameful, right? So
mm,
why should we be ashamed of our bodies if God created them this way, kind of thing? But I also think it's interesting that Christianity itself,
mm,
it when it originated, it
mm,
was more Dionysus. And then it
mm,
became more Apollo,
right.
you know? And
Mm,
I feel like when you treat any religion
mm,
more like Apollo,
mm,
when it's like overly strict and overly
mm,
stern and
mm,
overly rigid,
mm,
that actually can do more harm than good. But if you can approach a
mm,
religion with a balance of both,
mm,
then a religion can be a healthy thing.
mm.
Right. I feel like we could go off on a
Yeah,
long
we go. Right.
tangent about religion, but
Mm,
just looking through the lens of this
mm,
particular text, I do think
mm,
it is interesting how some religions
mm,
lean more towards Apollo and other
mm,
religions lean more towards Dionysus. And I think
mm,
the healthiest religions are probably a balance of
mm,
both. But I like that quote that you shared,
mm,
trusting in nature.
mm,
Um, as opposed to looking at nature as like something bad and then opening up to
mm.
growth and expansion. I think that's key,
And
right?
yeah. Well, I just say, just to clarify about the Christian thing, like it's just saying that something came into the universe that corrupted it, and it's a human's fault.
Hmm.
you know. And so that kind of stuff is what drove me out. It
Yeah.
was that's something was wrong with that, like because the suffering was built into nature. It was existed long before humans existed. So, um, but from a conservative Christian standpoint, which is where I used to be, we would phrase it by saying that this is a basically like a cancer that spread throughout the universe, starting with
Yeah.
sin. So it wasn't God's intention, and God intends to heal it. That's the idea of salvation and then restoration and the new
Mhm.
heavens and the earth and stuff like that. But what Keen is not Keen, but Fox is trying. I highly recommend people check out his book, Original Blessing, because it's really amazing. Um, but what he's trying to say is that like we're in trying to deal with these whatever people see is wrong with the world, we're actually like harming ourselves because we don't understand the context. We're like focusing on a subcontext, which is like, I got to solve this problem, whatever it is. For Christians, it's sin. I got to solve sin. For other people, it's something else. But you're so obsessed with solving this problem and not spending enough time focusing on like how the universe and human beings function in a healthy way. Like you're just, you're looking for the
You're
boogeyman. Okay,
focused on the problem instead of the
yeah.
solution,
No,
or you're focused
the
on
context.
just eliminating the problem instead of trying to understand the root cause of the problem.
Yeah, and beyond that, just saying like, what's the context for all this? Like how, because like the context is so important. And that's me as a historian. Like historians are all about context. So like,
Hmm.
so in other words, like if you're trying to say that, we got to like COVID, for example, when it happened, you could just say, okay, these people that had COVID, let's just lock them away. If we just lock them away, COVID goes away. You know, but first of all, that's cruel, right? So that'd be like a last resort to do that. But there's a reason why it's killing people. And a reason why it's not killing everybody. And in order to, but the Black Plague happened, they didn't understand that. So their responses were so misguided because they had no understanding. So
Yeah.
some people thought it was because human sin. Some people thought it, came from this part of the world or whatever. They didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't. So I'm just saying, like, trying to you can focus on the problem, but the way that you perceive the problem and the way you perceive what to do about the problem has everything to do with the context. Like, what do you understand about, again, like the situation? Like, where, like,
How the
you know what
problem
I'm
came
saying?
about in the first place. Like, what are the
Yeah.
conditions of society that created
Mm,
this problem? So instead
yeah.
of just trying to like squash a roach,
Mm,
try to
mm,
understand how the roach got into the house, right?
mm,
And maybe take
mm,
some self-responsibility. Did
mm,
I do something to contribute to this problem?
mm,
So I think it seems like what you're saying is
mm,
instead of just focusing on eliminating what we
mm,
perceive as a problem,
mm,
trying to understand the problem, trying to understand how it came about, the root
mm,
cause, and asking ourselves, did I actually should I take accountability for this problem? What am I doing? Because I'm part of the world, I'm part of
mm,
society. Like, is there
mm,
anything I can do myself? I think what we perceive as problems, like
mm,
instead of trying to like focus on other people and like
mm,
getting rid of people that we think are a
mm,
problem,
mm,
maybe starting with ourselves, like, and because that's all we can, we have a lot more control over our what we do than what
mm,
anyone else does. But yeah, I mean, any problem in society, it's like, okay, well, the context of it, like
mm.
how is this like who is this a problem for and why?
Uh,
Like I
mm,
always think it's best to just try to come from a place of trying to understand. Like
mm,
even if this person or like if someone's behaving committing a crime,
mm,
right? Instead of just throwing the criminal
mm,
in a jail,
mm,
is there a way we can try to understand the
mm,
criminal, and treat the criminal humanely
mm,
and see if there's a way to rehabilitate
mm.
criminals instead of just like, killing them, like squashing them like roaches. Right? So
Yeah,
anyway,
because it might, yeah, it might not solve the problem. Like like for example, like I know we'll wrap it up soon, but like one thing I've been fascinated with is studying personality types
yeah.
and also not just like Myers-Briggs Enneagram, but also religious and political temperaments or personality types. So like one thing I'm fascinated with is in the past 20 years, there's a lot of science showing that conservative and liberal brains, for example, are physiologically different. There's a
Mm.
lot of studies showing that if you Google conservative liberal brain, you can see all these research.
Mm.
And so they're literally seeing the world different. So if when things get in an extreme situation, a conservative or a liberal could say, the world would be better if the conservatives were gone or if the liberals were gone. But the problem is that a lot of it's genetic. Like
Mm.
one of the experts on this, he wrote Jonathan Haidt's, a social psychologist. He's an expert on this research, and he wrote a book called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided Over Politics and Religion. He says in one of the last chapters that he thinks that 40% of the reason why someone is liberal or conservative in religion or politics is genetic. The rest of it is, nurture, as far as like
Yeah.
the family, the culture.
Yeah.
So I'm just giving that as an example of applying the problem solution thing without context. So you could say, well, the problem is these people, or the problem is, this movement or whatever. But if you just get rid of it and it's actually part of the system, and it's actually part of what it means to be human, like it's part of the population, that's not going to solve anything because
Right.
it's going to come right back. You could teach everyone conservative or liberal values, and the conservatives are going to come back in the gene pool. So they're going to show up again. They
Mhm.
might be suppressed, like someone who has a conservative temperament is going to be suppressed in a liberal environment, and vice versa. But they're going to come back. So that's what I'm getting at. It's like
Yeah.
we need to study human nature. We need to study the rest of nature and understand like what are the parameters and that's what all this stuff Dionysus and Apollo to me is about. It's like
Yeah.
say what are the 10, 20, 30 legitimate lifestyles that are that we can choose from or that are part of our nature, and what are the other 30 that are toxic?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And just
Yeah.
and instead of trying to reduce it down to just like you can only be this, and this, the other
Hmm.
society says no, you can only be this, and so you actually have to move to some other part of the world because nobody here accepts you. You know what I'm saying? I can go on and on,
Yeah.
but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I don't have time to go into too much politics right now, but
Yeah.
going back to looking at it through this lens, through this
Hmm.
text, you
Yeah.
could you could think of
Mm.
conservatives as
Mm.
more of an Apollo
Right.
philosophy,
Right.
liberals as more of Dionysus
Mm.
philosophy,
Right.
and Keene is exemplifying how if
Mm.
you take any type of philosophy to the extreme, it can be
Right.
toxic on both ends. Just
Right.
like, you know,
Yeah.
radical conservatives are just
Mm.
as toxic as
Mm.
radical liberals,
Right.
you know. So,
Right.
so I feel like this
Mm.
concept can be
Mm.
applied as
Mm.
a metaphor for politics and just
Yeah.
a way of life. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate what Keene has written
Mm.
here. And in conclusion, if today's conversation reminded you to pause, even for a moment, and see the world through a different lens, then that's actually the beginning of what Sam Keen calls authentic life.
Uh,
And we all sort of swing between the comfort of Apollo and the chaos of Dionysus, but the art is learning the timing, feeling when to act and when to let go, when to reason and when to dance. And that's where wonder lives, right in that tension between control and surrender. So, thank you for listening to the podcast. And if this sparked something in you, share it, leave a note, or just take a walk outside without your phone and see what
yeah.
astonishes you. But until next time, keep your eyes open and your heart curious and your feet in rhythm with the world. And thank you so much for chatting with me today
Yeah.
about this author. I really appreciate you introducing me to this.